Insights can often come from the strangest of places. Some of the most illuminating and helpful pieces of financial information I've ever stumbled on have come from places that are entirely unrelated to the field of personal finance. With that in mind, today I'm going to be launching a new mini-series on the channel covering some of those insights, where I came across them, and what makes them so potentially helpful to our finances. But before we get going, be sure to like this video if you haven't already, as it really does help out the channel a lot, and subscribe with notifications on for more money-related videos like this one every single week. And if you want to further support this channel, you can check out some of the links I've left in the description below, which includes a 30-day free trial of Audible and 2 free audiobooks of your choice, as well as a list of some books on money I'd recommend checking out with your free trial. The first insight, which I've found to be very helpful in managing my financial life, is to always begin with the end in mind. This piece of advice comes from best-selling author Stephen Covey in his famous book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Making every financial decision with a clear understanding of the destination you want to arrive at when all is said and done is incredibly important and beneficial for obvious reasons. Without it, you're basically just taking shots in the dark and hoping for a positive outcome, which can work out all right, especially in the short term, but particularly when it comes to longer term goals like saving for a down payment on a home, or retirement, or heck, even building a career, it can be a lot less reliable. Say that John was trying to work out a budget. There are many ways that he could go about trying to do this. He could go with a comprehensive style budget where he details all of his expenses on individual line items and tracks them religiously. He could split his expenses up into a handful of different expense categories and allocate a certain percentage of his budget to each. He could ditch the budget creation process altogether and simply find a way to live on only the cash that he has on hand at any given time. He could prioritize certain categories of his budget before all others, which is a common approach for those who utilize a reverse budget and prioritize paying themselves first before all else. Or he could even try and align his spending with his values. All are viable options, but all can also potentially fail. The comprehensive style budget can be incredibly valuable, especially when trying to get the most out of every dollar that comes in the door. Because since you are directing and tracking literally every penny you spend, there should, theoretically, be no financial waste. At least after you've had time to dial in the budget. However, it's also a bit more work than the other budgets, not only to set up, but also to maintain. Again, you're tracking every single penny. Budgets where you split your money up into several categories and allocate a certain percentage to each solves this rampant overwork issue, but comes at the cost of less precision and financial awareness. There's a lot more potential for financial leakage with a percentage-based budget than there is with a comprehensive style budget, because percentage-based budgets can often lull us into the mentality that so long as we're not overspending in any one category, it doesn't really matter what the money in each individual category is being spent on. And to be fair, in a lot of cases, that is absolutely true. Broadly speaking, if you're not overspending in any of your categories, it may not really matter all that much what you're spending the money on. Sure, you may not be getting quite as much enjoyment out of your money as you theoretically could be if you were consciously making decisions that would improve your financial efficiency, but you're still moving in the right direction towards your goals, unless, of course, we underestimate our needs within certain categories. For instance, what if John put only 5% of his budget towards saving for his future? Or worse, what if he didn't put any money at all towards his future because that just slipped his mind when he was creating his categories? In the here and now, he'd be having a grand old time. But a few decades down the road, we could expect that he'd arrive at a startling realization that he is well behind financially. He'd have to either significantly tighten his financial belt in order to make up for lost time, or try to find non-traditional ways to manufacture money, potentially by making highly risky bets with his investments in the hopes of squeezing out a little extra money in returns. But as we all know, that approach can easily go sideways. Reverse budgets try to put this issue to bed by ensuring that you're always paying yourself first and prioritizing saving for your future. And when the savings decision is automated, these budgets can work incredibly well for a lot of people. The potential problems are that there's still a chance that you don't set your savings threshold high enough to cover your future needs, and there's often a temptation to tweak the savings figures temporarily downward in order to deal with issues that are more pressing in the here and now. If the tweaks are temporary and infrequent, then it may not be all that big of a deal, but sometimes temporary drags on a lot longer than we'd like to admit. The point is, none of these approaches are without potential drawbacks. So John needs to figure out what his end goal is for this budget so that he can use that information, along with a bit of self-awareness regarding how he tends to handle financial tasks, to determine what approach is likely to be best for him. If he tends to be a bit of an impulse spender, then prioritizing paying himself first is probably a good thing to have in his budget. It wouldn't be the only thing he'd want to do in order to combat that impulsivity, but it would be a solid start. If he's in a tight financial spot, not, or really running short on time and therefore needs to be as financially efficient as possible, then a comprehensive budget may be a good option due to its ability to maximize each dollar you bring in. However, if he tends to put off completing financial tasks because they just don't interest him, or he's got some historical baggage when it comes to subjects like money, which is something a lot of us have, then trying to do a comprehensive budget right off the bat may not be the best place to start, even if he does eventually work his way there, simply because he'd be more liable to mentally or emotionally freeze up when confronted with the task, or just look at how much work would be required to set up and maintain the budget and decide it's just not worth the effort. The second insight, which I found to be very helpful in managing my financial life, is to keep things as simple as possible when it comes to personal finance. There's no hiding the fact that we tend to make finance way more complicated than most of us will ever really need it to be. You can see it in the comments section or reviews of just about any simple piece of financial content out there, whether it be a podcast, video, or a book. It usually includes something about how the piece of content did not teach the person anything new because all the things that was talked about were the basic fundamentals of financial success, whether that's spending less than you earn, using dollar cost averaging and buy and hold strategies to grow your money, keeping your debts under control, or some other time-honored piece of financial wisdom. It's not that these comments are saying that the pieces of advice are bad. The complaint is that there should be more ideas, more pieces of advice, and, if we're honest, more sophistication and complexity, though that part is rarely explicitly stated. And I'm not saying that these people are wrong to make those comments, because obviously there is a lot more that we can do to get into the weeds, so to speak, and better optimize our path towards financial success. But when you get right down to it, there's not a whole lot you really need to know in order to lead a reasonably financially successful lifestyle. You probably would need to know a ton if you wanted to live the quote-unquote optimal financial lifestyle, but if numerous studies on the ultra-wealthy are anything to go by, there seems to be quite a bit of diminishing returns beyond the point where you have enough to be satisfied that for the vast majority of people, the time and effort that you'd have to put forth to reach that optimal point probably isn't worth it, even if reaching it was guaranteed after putting in the work, which it isn't. Not just because there are things beyond our control, but also because we evolve and change as we go through life. The things that we would have considered optimal at one point may not be considered optimal by the time we're actually able to implement them. Thankfully, the things you do need to know to lead a reasonably financially successful lifestyle rarely change all that much at their core. If you can find a way to sustainably and enjoyably spend less than you make through some combination of reasonably strong income generation capabilities and efficient spending, especially on those big ticket items like homes and cars, if you manage to get yourself to stick to an investing approach that's fairly straightforward, easy to maintain, and has a long track record of success, and if you can manage to keep your debts under control or even eliminate them entirely, then 99 times out of 100, you're probably going to be fine financially. If we're being honest, you're probably going to be better than fine. Historically speaking, a middle-class, frugal, long-term, buy-and-hold index fund investor with minimal debts has very few potential points of failure. There are things like major negative life changes, such as a messy divorce, that can throw a wrench in things for sure, and then there's medical emergencies that can also obviously throw a wrench in things, but even in those situations, it's rarely a back-breaking setback for this kind of individual, whereas someone who tries to overthink and overcomplicate things can easily wind up in a highly leveraged, highly risky situation that can lead to one of a few outcomes. Most notably, either things break really well for this person and it leads them to accumulating a level of wealth that our middle-class frugal investor could hardly dream of, or it breaks in the other direction, leading to things like bankruptcies, or in the most extreme cases, things that are much worse than bankruptcies. The point is, Grandma's wisdom, in the vast majority of cases, still applies in the world of finance today, even if some of the specifics surrounding that advice are a little different. And I honestly think that that's a fantastic thing, because this slow shifting nature of the keys to financial success makes it much more achievable for those who maybe aren't as interested in learning all of the intricacies of personal finance. If the keys to long-term sustainable financial success did change rapidly, then the only ones who could realistically hope to attain it would be those who are in the trenches learning about those intricacies day in and day out. The third insight, which I've found to be very helpful in managing my financial life, is to wait a week before making discretionary purchases. This is something that my dad taught me when I was really young. He said, whenever you want to buy something, assuming it isn't an urgent need, wait a week. If after that week you still want the thing as much as you did when you first saw it, then by all means, buy it. If not, Well, then congratulations. You have successfully avoided falling prey to buyer's remorse. It's a really simple concept, but it can be very helpful to a lot of people. In fact, in the past I've said that this may very well be the single best money-saving piece of advice I've ever received. Not necessarily because it saved me more money than anything else, but it does do something else that is arguably just as important. Once you make this into a habit, you become almost immune to impulse spending, which can make budgeting and financial planning in general much easier and much more reliable. And by extension, you tend not to be as impacted by a lot of marketing tactics either, because many of them focus on creating a sense of urgency in the consumer to jump on a deal before it's gone. Put those two things together, and I'm not sure exactly how much money it's saved me, although it is probably quite a chunk of change, but the added level of simplicity to my financial lifestyle that it's brought has certainly been worth a lot. So those are 3 financial insights that I've found to be particularly helpful in managing my finances. Like I said, I'm looking to turn this into a bit of a mini-series, so if you have any insights that you found to be particularly helpful in your own life, be sure to leave them in the comments section below, and they may just be included in a future video in this series. But that'll do it for me today. Once again, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to smash that like button if you haven't already, subscribe, and hit that bell next to my name so you'll be notified of all my future uploads. I generally upload every single Monday, and if you have a friend that would be interested in this kind of content, be sure to share it with them. Let's really get this information out there and start our own financial revolution.